Oh my God, the Raiders had one of their most embarrassing losses against the Denver Broncos, and you have people wondering, could the end be near for Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce, who recently butted heads with star wide receiver Davante Adams, who's on the trade block right now. We're going to break down this game and what the future holds for this Raiders team. Now, the Raiders were traveling to face the Denver Broncos. The Broncos were at home, and I found this hilarious. Tashawn Reed of The Athletic posted this. Shout out to this guy and a fan still in a Davante Adams jersey, even though he has requested a trade, and the Raiders are going to ship him out soon. Look, we paid money for the Davante Adams jersey. I rocked my Davante Adams jersey during this game. I still root for the guy. I still like the guy, and it cost over $100. I'm not just going to throw that away out of nowhere. Speaking of the Davante Adams situation, Max Crosby spoke out about this for the first time.
How tough was it for you this week with all the Davante stuff?
Nah, it is what it is. You think I'm not used to this shit going on? It is what it is. Been dealing with it my whole career, so it is what it is. You know, Davante's my boy. I love Davante, and he's gonna do what he's gonna do. Praying for him, wish him the best. You know, he's not healthy right now. He's got to get healthy. But we're focused on the Raiders, you know what I mean? We're focused on who's here now.
The key comment there was Max Crosby saying he's used to this shit. Obviously, he's saying that he's still friends with Davante Adams, but saying you're used to this and you've been dealing with this your whole career, what is this? We're going to show and talk about this a little bit later. Charles Woodson had some things to say about it, but it's this whole trend of star players leaving the Raiders, not really gelling with the team and not seeing themselves live up to their full potential with the Raiders. And Davante Adams is experiencing this. There are tons of people, tons of Raiders fans who told me all offseason, there's no way Davante Adams is going to be traded. He says he loves being a Raider. Oh, you know, his grandma lives nearby, so there's no way he's going to be traded. Obviously, it was always the case, and you could tell during the offseason projections that the Raiders were not Super Bowl bound, and Davante Adams at his early 30s desperately wants to get a championship since he never has in his career. A trade was inevitable, especially given the contract situation too with Davante Adams and his deal being inflated next season. But there was another fella in the NFL world who rubbed Max Crosby the wrong way. This was absolutely crazy. Vegas Sports Today got this interview with Max Crosby, and he was talking about Michael Lombardi, the freaking dad of the former offensive coordinator of the Raiders, Mick Lombardi, who was the coordinator under Josh McDaniels. Lombardi always defended Josh McDaniels in the media. We have ripped on him a ton, and he did rip on Antonio Pierce during this past offseason. Now, actually, when you look at some of the disses that Michael Lombardi said about Antonio Pierce, to be quite honest, they have been sort of accurate, that Antonio Pierce acts more like a promoter.
Pierce is becoming a showman. I like strategists. I like tacticians. You're going to get your butt beat. Like, seriously, why would you stir up the Chiefs? Like, they're laughing. They're laughing at him. I think, to me, there's got to be more substance to this than just rah-rah. We're not in high school.
Exactly.
He's insulting our intelligence with this stuff. Be a head coach. Be a strategist. Keep your mouth shut. Don't put the gauntlet out. I mean, to me, he's just becoming P.T. Barnum. He's going out there selling stuff.
Wasn't bad there. But what Michael Lombardi said this past week about Max Crosby, he tried to make up allegations and imply that Max Crosby was not fully bought in with the team and pretty much faking an injury is basically what he alleged, because Max Crosby was not on the sideline last week.
Max Crosby didn't go to the game on Sunday with a hamstring. That, to me, bothers me. That tells me there's something going on in that locker room. Now, look.
So Crosby responded to that.
Talking on the Pat McAfee show saying, you know, something's going on, and they're speaking for me, saying I should be on the sideline when I got a high ankle sprain. You know what I mean? And these clowns, they're sitting on the couch talking about what I should be doing. But the reality is I'm gaining yardage and trying to get right, and so I can get back on the field. When you got clowns that are online and talking on, you know, they got their one day of the week where they get to go on the Pat McAfee show and talking about what we should do, and you haven't even been a GM. You're a GM for 1 year, so it's embarrassing. You know what I mean? Don't speak for me.
You were only a GM for a year. I thought that was absolutely hilarious to hear Max Crosby rip the resume of Michael Lombardi, saying you were only a GM for a year. He did work with the Raiders as an executive under Al Davis, then with the Patriots and also the Denver Broncos. But yeah, Only a general manager for the Cleveland Browns 2013 to 2014. Crosby knew that and made sure to rip into Lombardi. We're going to break down this Broncos game in a second, but you had Charles Woodson on the morning show talk about Davante Adams and this Raiders situation. I alluded to it earlier about how the Raiders can never have nice things.
What's going on?
Just trying to figure out why we can't have nice things with the Raiders. It's always something. I just think about over the years. Think about a guy like Khalil Mack. One of the premier pass rushers in the league, 4th overall pick. All of a sudden, we ship him out of the door. Last year, there's an opportunity. I don't know how real it was, but C.J. Stroud's the quarterback. He's sitting there at 2. Maybe we'd be aggressive and move up. We don't do it. And now what we have is a premier receiver in the NFL in Davante Adams. We just come off a win where Max Crosby's not in, Davante's not in, and guess what we're talking about? One of our guys wants to leave the team. So, it just seems like we're always in the sports news and media for all the wrong reasons.
Now, I do get where Charles Woodson is coming from, but I think there is some false equivalency going on here. He talked about Khalil Mack. That was really a totally different situation than the Davante Adams situation. Mack wanted to become the highest paid defensive player in the world and did not show up to training camp and was still under contract in the final year of his contract. Did not show up to preseason or training camp. The Raiders had to trade him away, and ultimately they were tanking in 2018. What's different about this Davante Adams situation is the fact that the Raiders kind of convinced the fan base, and I think that's why people are really frustrated right now with Antonio Pierce, that we are not rebuilding. We are bringing back Antonio Pierce for continuity. We are signing Christian Wilkins to a decent contract, paying decent money to Gardner Minshew, still $12.5 million a year. Part of this idea was like, hey, the Raiders are still trying to compete this year. They're going for continuity. It's not a rebuild. And instead, it looks like it's going to be that, especially when you're trading away somebody like Davante Adams, who is arguably the best player, who is the best player on the offensive side of the football. He also brought up C.J. Stroud not trading up in the draft for C.J. Stroud under Josh McDaniels. I honestly don't think that was ever an option, if we're being real. The Houston Texans clearly wanted Stroud with that number 2 overall pick, and I don't think they're about to give that up to the Raiders. Now on to this game, which ended up being an absolute disaster for the Raiders. Things looked good at first. There was a moment in this game when it was 10-0, I believe late in the first quarter, and I honestly thought, okay, the Raiders are going to win this game. Antonio Pierce is going to shut out the noise. He's going to prove that, hey, maybe Davante Adams was a distraction, and this is really a good Raiders team, and they just need to get some of the divas out of the building, and they'll do well. Well, all of that was proven completely wrong as the Raiders instantly fell apart in the next 3 quarters. And a lot of people are trying to blame this all on Gardner Minshew. No, there are so many problems in this game. We're going to get into it. But the Broncos snap an 8-game losing streak to the Raiders and beat them for the first time since December 2019, the very end of that 2019 season, the Antonio Brown season. Well, that was the last time the Denver Broncos beat the Raiders. It's been a long time. It's been 4 seasons, but it finally happened. Bo Nix had multiple touchdowns, passing touchdowns in this game. The first time in his career so far, he's had multiple touchdowns in this game. And the Broncos put up 34 unanswered points. The rock-solid defense of the Raiders did not look too rock-solid. Could that have been because Christian Wilkins, the star defensive tackle we just mentioned earlier, who was signed to a massive contract in free agency just this past offseason, well, he got hurt during this game, and you didn't see him for the second half of the game, ruled out with a foot injury. Some people thought maybe he was celebrating after he got a sack and that led to him getting injured. I don't know, but the Raiders looked bad on defense, couldn't get a stop, and obviously they were even worse on the offensive side of the football. And I know there were some interceptions. We're going to get into Minshew Mania's horrible interceptions in a little bit, but there were still just some suspect play calls that I saw during this game. I'm talking about a 3rd and 5. There is a 3rd and 5 when the Raiders are in Broncos territory. And on 3rd and 5, you would think you would pass the football, but instead the Raiders ran the football on 3rd and 5. Okay, you run the football on 3rd and 5 in your opponent's territory because you're planning on going for it on 4th down. Well, no, that was not the case. Instead, Antonio Pierce did not go for it on 4th down. It was 4th and 2 and decided to punt around the 40-ish yard line of the Broncos after you ran the ball on 3rd and 5. I just don't understand the decision making of Antonio Pierce, this head coach. Some people want to say it's all the offensive coordinator making these decisions. No, the head coach decides if you're going to go for it. The head coach decides if you're going to go with this certain strategy. I don't think you can pin this all on offensive coordinator Luke Getsy. And we've seen Antonio Pierce since week 1 against the Chargers make some boneheaded decisions on not going for it. Remember, he broke the freaking record of punting in your opponent's territory when you're down in the fourth quarter. It was a historic situation we saw week 1, and it seems like he has not learned from it in week 5. Now, the first interception that Gardner Minshew did was absolutely deflating because the Raiders had the lead and they were about to go up 3 possessions. Granted, it was very early in the game at the 5-yard line, and then you throw a pick 6. It's not like you just throw a regular pick. You had Brock Bowers open. There was an opponent in your face. We saw Minshew Mania mess up, throw a freaking interception to Patrick Surtain, and that was when the game completely shifted. That was when we were like, all right, is this going to be the moment the Broncos get back on track and absolutely dominate? And they did absolutely dominate. From then on, the Raiders offense never bounced back. And you even had Gardner Minshew, and this was Gardner Minshew's last play of the day. And this might actually be Gardner Minshew's last play as a Raider. It's quite possible. We're going to get into the quarterback situation in a little bit, but you had Brandon Perna, one of the great NFL YouTubers, talking about this, how you had a white corner, Riley Moss, picking off Gardner Minshew, and I find that absolutely hilarious that we saw a unicorn, which is a white cornerback, first of all, making that turnover, some white-on-white crime in the third quarter. After that interception, that's when something insane happened, something that I think is going to be very consequential going forward. The fact that Antonio Pierce decided to bench Gardner Minshew for the rest of the game and put in the second-year quarterback Aiden O'Connell, who started the second half of the season last year, filling in for Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, let me just say, I don't personally believe in Aiden O'Connell. I'm not one of these Aiden O'Connell fans where I think he could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. I think he seems like a nice person, great guy, but I think his ceiling is a backup quarterback. And look, people thought at the moment that they put Aiden O'Connell in, maybe this game could turn around. The Raiders were only down 10 points in that moment, but no, it was instantly a 3-and-out in his next drive. And I think if he would have led the Raiders to some type of comeback victory, then you would have had him be the starting quarterback for sure for the rest of the season. Antonio Pierce was asked about the Raiders quarterback situation, asked if, who's going to be the starter next week. Can you let us know? Here's what he had to say.
What are you going to do at quarterback? Will AOC be starting next week?
I don't know. I haven't answered that one yet.
So this is an absolute disaster. The guy is lacking complete confidence. He can't even name who the starting quarterback is going to be next week. He's already made multiple decisions and choices that I think have rubbed people the wrong way in the locker room. A lot of people aren't talking about this. You even have people in the NFL media trying to act like Antonio Pierce is still doing a great job, despite the fact that the Raiders are having unprecedented losses, blown out against the Carolina Panthers, now getting their ass whooped by the Denver Broncos. Yes, they had a fluke win against the Baltimore Ravens in week 2, but we know that was fool's gold. And yes, they had a victory against arguably the worst team in the NFL, the Cleveland Browns. So we can't be too impressed with what Antonio Pierce has done so far. And he so far has done the business decisions comment, which we still don't know who that was about. Was it about Davante Adams? Maybe. Then he'd like to post on Instagram about how Davante Adams has played his final down as a Raider. Now, that's not going to make Davante Adams happy. That's not going to make other players in the locker room happy. By the way, it's not the first time that Antonio Pierce has killed the trade leverage and the overall front office leverage of the Raiders. So he liked that post on Instagram about how Davante Adams played his last down as a Raider. What does that do? What does that do? When you are a month away from the trade deadline, that accelerates the trade. That makes you lose your leverage, where everybody in the NFL knows you are out with Davante Adams. You have to get rid of him before the trade deadline. Therefore, you can no longer argue that you may keep him no matter what happens this season, and you consider him really valuable. You already announced it to the NFL world, to all the fans, when you liked that post on Instagram that you were moving on to that you were moving on from Davante Adams, killing your leverage, making it so other teams like the Saints and the Jets don't have to give you that much because they know you're going to get rid of him before the trade deadline for sure. That is 100% going to happen. You kill your leverage. And Antonio Pierce did the same thing with the draft. In this past offseason, he kept talking about Jaden Daniels. He kept talking about the fact that he's aggressive, has a go-getter mentality, and would be into trading up. He pretty much showed his hand that he would be into trading up in the NFL draft for a franchise quarterback. He said he did not want to have band-aids at the quarterback position. He said that is old, and he gave up all of the Raiders' leverage in the offseason. Everybody knew that they were desperate to trade up, in particular, desperate to trade up for Jaden Daniels. When you announce to the entire world what you want to do, what you hope you can do, that makes the price of what you want to do go up exponentially. And that is exactly what happened with the Raiders in this past offseason. That is why it was such a steep hill and almost impossible for them to trade up in the draft. Now, look, granted, the Commanders likely would not have traded their second overall pick anyways, but when you let everybody know what you're going to do, you ruin your leverage and you make things more expensive. We've had trading up in the draft for a QB more expensive, and now we have trading away Davante Adams. You're going to get less capital for that because everybody knows you're moving on from the guy by November 3rd. And now we're getting into the most recent problem. Antonio Pierce, and you can go back to right before the Cowboys preseason game. I don't have it here right off the top, but right before the Cowboys preseason game, after they played that preseason game against the Minnesota Vikings, Antonio Pierce said that whoever the Raiders start, they're going to be behind him. They're going to be behind him for the entire year. They're not going to have them walking on eggshells, right? Well, now you just benched your quarterback in the middle of the game when you were down 10 points. Now, look, Gardner Minshew did throw 2 interceptions. I get that, but we now have a quarterback controversy. We now have QBs walking on eggshells. We now have QBs who don't have confidence, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle after you do that. The moment that you bench Gardner Minshew, what's that going to do for his confidence going forward if you need to rely on the guy? And do you really think you're going to be able to have him start again next week? And if Aiden O'Connell does not work out, are you going to end up benching him and putting Gardner Minshew back in? What is the plan here? It shows that there is no plan. And the fact that Antonio Pierce can't even answer the question as to who the quarterback is going to be next week shows that he is just randomly pulling shit out of his ass. And quite frankly, I'm sorry, he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Vegas Sports Today had this interview. Gardner Minshew was asked about being benched and what was going through his head.
It is what it is. Try to help the team whatever I can. Try to still be in Aiden's ear. Tell him the things I've been seeing. And keep providing positive presence on the sideline.
So Gardner Minshew looks deflated. He doesn't know what the hell is going on. And quite frankly, he looks like he doesn't even care anymore. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too deep into it. You guys let me know. But you got Raiders fans already pissed. We're in week 5 and they're already pissed about Antonio Pierce. Fire Antonio Pierce is becoming the motto. That's what tons of people are saying. And I can't blame them because look, I always thought this was an irresponsible hire from Mark Davis. He did not even try to interview somebody like Raheem Morris, who is the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. This guy has tons of experience, has been a defensive coordinator before, interim head coach multiple times, and has been a defensive coordinator for multiple teams, most recently the Los Angeles Rams, before becoming the full-time head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. The Raiders did not even try to interview other people. They just immediately went ahead and hired Antonio Pierce. Now, I say blame the fans because the fans were pounding the table for Antonio Pierce, saying they love the fact that he smokes cigars, drives a lowrider, listens to NWAs from Compton, therefore he should get the job. Really, it was just Mark Davis caving to the people who aren't the smartest to make the best decision, which are the emotional fans. And some people say the players. Oh, well, the players actually wanted him to be the head coach. I don't really buy that. There's only 3 players we really heard stump for Antonio Pierce and say they want him to have the job last year. And that was Jack Jones, who came with Antonio Pierce, basically. He got signed by when the Patriots put him on the waivers. And this guy has known Antonio Pierce since he was in high school, so he's a personal friend of his. It's not really like a real ringing, unbiased endorsement, right? And then you had Max Crosby, who pounded the table for him. Meanwhile, Max Crosby just only says positive things. Even under Josh McDaniels, all the way up till the day he was fired, Max Crosby was saying the locker room's great. Everybody loves Josh McDaniels. So he's always going to say anything that's positive for the Raiders, and good on him. That's what he has to do as a team captain. And the only other person outside of Jack Jones and Max Crosby that I remember pounding the table for Antonio Pierce is Davante Adams. And that has clearly spiraled out of control and not working out at all whatsoever, as Davante Adams has been beefing with Antonio Pierce lately, each, sending out signals to the media here. And now he's on the outs, has a hamstring injury, and is not even practicing and not even at the games anymore. So Literally one third of the people who pounded the table for Antonio Pierce when it comes to the players is not even going to be on the team anymore. And this is what you get, man. This is what you get when you don't go after somebody like Raheem Morris, when you don't try to interview other people for this head coaching job, and you just give a guy the job based on good vibes, based on maybe some of the joy he was bringing last year. This guy has never been a coordinator at the NFL level before, was only a positional coach for one season under Josh McDaniels, and then a few months until he became the interim head coach. He has no experience coaching at the NFL level, virtually none. There's a lot of former players who become NFL head coaches. I'm thinking of DeMeco Ryans off the top of my head, head coach of the Houston Texans. But this guy proved it. This guy was a coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. This guy was out there coaching at the NFL level for a few years, multiple years. I really wanted to get our facts right before we get into this. So yeah, DeMeco Ryans, former player, head coach, successful with the Houston Texans. But yes, 2017 with the Niners, defensive quality control. Then he was a linebacker coach for 2 years, then the defensive coordinator for 2 years, then a head coach. I mean, that is a lot of experience compared to somebody like Antonio Pierce. Another former player turned head coach that people like to compare to Antonio Pierce is Dan Campbell. But man, to me, I think it's insulting when people compare their resumes to each other. Dan Campbell, as a coach, was an intern for the Dolphins in 2010. He's literally been coaching at the NFL level since 2010. So before he became a head coach for the Lions in 2021, he was head coaching at the NFL level for freaking 11 years. He was the Dolphins tight end coach, was their interim head coach, 4 years as the tight end coach. And then with the Saints, under Sean Payton, somebody who just whooped Antonio Pierce's ass today, well, Dan Campbell was his assistant head coach for 4 to 5 years with the New Orleans Saints before becoming a head coach of the Detroit Lions. I just showed you 2 examples of former players who became head coaches. They have an insane resume compared to Pierce. Pierce was a linebacker coach, co-defensive coordinator for Arizona State. He technically did not get to coach in 2021 due to the recruiting violation scandal that maybe some of you guys have heard of. We covered it in some of our most recent videos. Then he was a linebacker coach for the Raiders in 2022, and that's his only NFL coaching experience. From that in 2022 for 1 year to interim head coach to head coach. That is way too big of a jump. And honestly, his resume is just nothing compared to some of these other guys. And the fact that people try to compare him to somebody like Dan Campbell, compare him to somebody like DeMeco Ryans, I think personally is insulting to the process and insulting to the institution that the NFL is and, the NFL coaching world is. I think it's really tough to be an NFL head coach. I think it's one of the top positions in all of sports, and I think it's super competitive. And I don't think so just some random dude who has good vibes could just come in and dominate and do well. I think that's idiotic to think that that's the case. So why would the Raiders do this if Antonio Pierce is so severely unqualified? Well, maybe this year, and maybe he's in on it, who knows, maybe this year is supposed to be a year where we don't do too well and just try to get some good draft capital. You're already trading away your best offensive player, and now you're losing to teams that you should beat if you're a competitive team. We'll see what happens. Like this video if you have not yet. We'll keep you up to date on the Raiders and the rest of the NFL. Subscribe to me, Wi-Fi Willie. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.